Hi, this is Brenda and Elaine.
Welcome to our After the Show episode, where we go deeper into what we learned from our conversations with guests.
So, our episode with Celeste about moving from Brooklyn to North Carolina was so interesting because oftentimes when we think about our health, it's not a factor that we consider when we consider where we live. But in that episode, we realized that there's so much about how we're able to live a healthy lifestyle that is dependent on where we live. So, what were some of your takeaways from our conversation with Celeste?
Well, I think when you grow up in a certain place, you're used to the environment that you're in. And because we watch TV and get a lot of inputs, we have ideas about what other places can offer. So I think it's so interesting that she and her family were so reticent about moving from New York to North Carolina because they had all these thoughts in their minds about what it was. I think it was really brave of her to move past that and go ahead and do it. It was very interesting to me to see how she changed her mind because we don't know until we experience something. We really don't know. So I'm glad that she moved past her initial reticence and did it and then found a place that she really enjoyed being.
Yeah, and I think, first of all, that's credit to Celeste to be willing to step out and take a risk into the quote unquote unknown. And then, second, to be willing to say, hey, I actually really like it here because she found the positives. And every place you live has pros and cons, but there were so many positives about her lifestyle that she loved Brooklyn for its energy and its culture, but then she realized, oh, well, there's a different energy and culture here. So it was just lovely to see and to think about.
And we're lucky we live in times where we can go back and forth. I mean, we live one place, but it's easy to go visit her family. She can go see a Broadway show and do what she wants to in New York and then come home. And she said she's always glad to come home. And it's funny because her kids were raised in North Carolina. And for them, New York felt just like hustle bustle.
Too much.
Yeah.
Right.
They were not comfortable, being there for long periods of time. So our foundation really influences the way we feel about a place even.
Yeah. And I think wherever you live, finding ways that you can exercise, ways that you can get out into fresh air and sunshine. So if that's, apartment living in a city, which I'm about to do, then it's, walks in the park and potentially pickleball. And if it's suburban living, it's something else. And,
Right.
She talked about horseback riding.
Yeah, you can find ways to be active anywhere. And there's, the other things that she talked about that are environmentally based would be your access to healthy food. Sometimes it's easier in one place than another. She talked about going to the farmer's market and actually talking to the farmers as opposed to going to a farm stand, which you can do in New York, and the food has probably traveled a little further distance. But all of those factors come into play when you're considering your health. You can be healthy anywhere. You might have to work harder on certain aspects of it in different places,
Right.
but definitely worth the effort.
Yeah, I was thinking about my garden, which I will miss when I move out of this house. And I remember I was growing shishito peppers and they grow like crazy. And I would just go stir fry a bunch of shishito peppers because they were available. And I'm not sure I would have gone to the grocery store every week and bought a bunch of shishito peppers and just eaten them. And so I have to think about, okay, I'm not going to have a garden now. Maybe I'll do one of those CSA boxes where you get fresh vegetables delivered to you,
Right.
from a farm. What is an alternative to the healthy thing I was doing in my previous home?
Yeah, so there's ways to do it, and I'm glad Celeste found it. But I also thought about, you and I grew up in basically the Metro DC area, which is the South, but not really the deep South.
Yeah, to our cousins from Massachusetts, it's the South.
Right. And so when I was making my choice to go to college, and I chose to come to college in North Carolina, I just remember many people being very surprised and not really supportive of that choice because they also had the ideas that many Northerners do about the South. And we know the historical part of the South is a lot of negative stuff for Black people. And it has changed for sure, and it's not a monolith. There's a lot of good things, and there's racism, and there's a lot of people doing wonderful things like Celeste talked about, and a rich history of African Americans being resourceful and
Entrepreneurs.
right. So, and all of that is everywhere, but it's the stories that we're told that we sort of cleave to, I believe. Being open, which is something that Celeste was, I think, is a good lesson for us all. You know, it may not be for you, but I think being open to find out for yourself what something is, whether it's a place or an idea, is not a bad thing.
And I think that's the other thing, is that any city, any place has its communities. So, you know, we had a lot of relatives from Massachusetts who moved to Phoenix, Arizona. We have had relatives who moved to Washington State. And it's interesting because in those places, there's, of course, the standard people you expect to be living in those places. But then there's communities. Even where Dad lives in Front Royal, there's a Latinx community. So even if you have to move to a place that might be different from what you're used to, what you've known, the community you identify with, you can seek out and may find a sub-community that suits your needs. Be open to the possibility, be open to exploring, and you may just be surprised.
Thank you, Celeste, for sharing your story on the Body Wealth Podcast.
Let us know what you learned from this guest.
If you want to support Body Wealth, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. We'd also love it if you give us a 5-star rating and write a review letting us know what you love about the show.
The Body Wealth Podcast shares personal stories to inspire you. It does not constitute medical advice. For that, we encourage you to work with a trusted healthcare provider.